So I was teaching intermediate Hispanic adults. They were coming from Colombia, Portugal, Peru, Ecuador, and of course, Spain. I used an eclectic approach, which means I didn't go for a single approach like PPP or TBL, but I borrowed elements from different approaches to best cater for my students' needs. And I taught models for speculation and deduction in non-past time or in present, for example, might for uncertainty, must for logical certainty, and can't for impossibility. I chose these items because my students had a tendency to avoid models in general and use or overuse actually affirmative and negative sentences to talk about certainty, like he's not your father or he's your father, or they over relied on I think, maybe, or the inaccurate is possible for uncertainty. So they would say, is possible, he's your father. So I thought that teaching them the models would help bring their own voice into what they were saying, bring their own perspective. So the eclectic approach consisted of a task-teach-task structure. There were some tasks, but I'd already predetermined the target language. There was a text. I used Norrington Davis's Exploring Reasons instead of rules because I didn't want to present the models with percentages the way it's typically done in course books, like 90% this or 50% that. I used a matching task for meaning, and I stole an idea from Meddings and Thornberry's Teaching Unplugged, the what you say, what I would say activity. And I tweaked it to what you say, what you could say. I used Caldwell's Garden, which is a technique to focus on connected speech. And it was something that my students were already trained in using. And there were two metacognitive stages during which learners would reflect on the new language. They would think about it and the problems they were having with it. I'd already planned how I would use my whiteboard, which is something I did for all my LSAs. There was a column for emergent vocabulary, a column for spoken and written form, a column for students to match cards, which would help them understand the meaning of the models, and the what you say, what you could say section. In the what you say section, I would write sentences students produced before they were presented with the models, and then I would ask them to reformulate them. So after I'd presented the models, I would ask them to think of how they could change these sentences and use the models. So I gave them the first task. I showed them a set of photographs. They were of my wedding day. I told them to guess who the people were or what the place was or what's the occasion. I told them to basically make sense of the photos and tell me what they think the story behind the photos was. I demoed just a few examples with a couple of students just to make sure that they all knew what they had to do. And they just did the task in pairs while I monitored. There was a reporting stage. I just elicited answers. I didn't interfere. I just encouraged some cross-classroom interaction. I recorded emergent vocabulary like civil wedding or in-laws or bride and groom, etc. And I boarded some sentences in the what you say section. As I had predicted, they didn't use the models. They relied on affirmative or negative sentences. Some of them used may and can. I told them that I'd already showed the photographs to my tutor and some colleagues. And this is what they said, I told them. So read the texts and tell me if you agree with them or if you guessed the same things. So basically, I just asked them to read a text and process it for meaning. Then there was a noticing stage. I told them to notice the modals. I modeled and drilled in isolation to make sure they get them right from the start. And we discussed reasons. I didn't present the models per se. I didn't tell them how we use them, but I just told them to read the sentences, pay attention to the co-text and context, and just figure out for themselves. And actually, I came up with some really good answers, like levels of certainty, for example. Then I also gave them the matching task, because this way they would also have a record of the target language with the meaning on the whiteboard. They did this, and then it was clear that they knew what each model meant in the specific sentences. Then we focused on the form, written and spoken, just highlighted it on the whiteboard. I told them to say the sentences quickly and notice if there were any sound changes. Again, this was something that they already knew how to do. So I don't recommend it for your LSA 4 unless you've already trained your students to do it in previous classes. So some of them came up actually with the elision of to. They said, oh yeah, if you say it really fast, maybe the to doesn't survive or it disappears. We also practice sentence stress. And I forgot to say that I modeled both the UK and the US form of can't. So I told them to choose the one they're comfortable with. Some of them chose the UK form, some of them chose the US form. Then I asked them to look back at their sentences and see if they could change them and if they could use the model. So said, if you're certain about something, which model can you use to say he's your husband? And they looked at the whiteboard, they looked at the matching task, if they had any doubts. And then they said, yeah, you use must. So he must be your husband. There was the first metacognitive stage. I told them, now think about what you've learned. Is it easy? Is it difficult? What problems do you have with the models, with meaning or form? Some of them said might is difficult to pronounce. Others said must is easy to use because we use it in Spanish. We say debe ser. Then others said, yeah, but you use debe ser with a full infinitive, but in English you say he must be. So that was a nice stage for them to think of the language, to compare the English version to the Spanish version. So it was quite interesting to hear their thoughts. I wasn't talking with them. I encouraged them to talk to each other about it. So then we had the second task, which was new sets of photos. And they were, again, funny, interesting from my childhood. And they were quite engaged, actually. So I told them again to try with different pairs and make sense of what they see. What's the story behind the photo? I just monitored. And then this time I prompted them to use the models because some of them were still avoiding them. Just take notes of any sentences like correct and incorrect sentences for the later feedback stage. Finally, just highlighted some sentences on the whiteboard. I elicited correction if they were inaccurate. I praised good examples. And then I asked them, that was the second metacognitive stage. I asked them what problems they still had with the models and to think of what further practice they needed. And it was nice to listen to them talk about it and make little action plans on how to overcome their learning problems. And there was this backup activity. I'd told them the week before to bring some photographs or digital photos on their mobile phones. And as a backup, I told them, okay, now you can show each other your own photos and try to guess who or what you see. It was quite funny and it was more authentic than actually commenting on the teacher's photos. They enjoyed the task and they were just, showing each other the photos in groups this time. And I heard some really nice sentences and yeah, they used the models after all this practice. And that's it. Thank you very much for watching and sorry this was so long.